Good morning. Saudi Cup. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today in Bangkok on the future of the UK's net zero journey and the lessons that we've learned over time. So I'm an ex-UK government official working to deliver net zero and energy security. Now I help governments and companies around the world to think about how they invest in energy and climate projects. So I primarily focus on carbon capture and storage. I started my career in power, but I've realized that we need to go beyond low carbon power to deliver deep decarbonisation. So carbon capture and storage is absolutely critical. So I can see some students in the audience, and I would urge any of you out there to please come and join the global effort on climate change in your careers. It's an exciting and fun place to be, and it has real meaningful impact. I believe that Thailand and Asia will be absolutely critical to the effort on net zero. And the UK and Thailand has a long history of working together. We recently celebrated 170 years of diplomatic relations, and we want to continue that in climate change. So I've got my lapel badge with the UK and Thailand flag on today to demonstrate that collaboration. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons that we've learned in the UK. And first of all, I'll just set out what the key messages are for the talk. So the UK has achieved major decarbonisation already, whilst the economy has continued to grow. So we've continued economic growth. Major economic benefits from investment have led to jobs and business opportunities. But we have learned some lessons. So we've learned lessons in policy, in prioritisation, and considering both the costs and the benefits of net zero. I would say that industrial decarbonisation through carbon capture and storage, as well as low carbon power, is absolutely necessary. And it's our belief that Thailand and the ASEAN region has a globally significant opportunity in industrial decarbonisation and CCS. So look, the UK committed early to ambitious long-term climate targets. So we put the Climate Change Act into law in 2008. And net zero is about more than decarbonisation. It's an economic transformation. So achieving an entirely decarbonised economy requires a complete transformation of how we produce and use energy, of industrial production, how we heat and cool our buildings, and how we fuel transport. So changing from a fossil fuel dependent economy to one of clean power, clean industry and transport, it comes with costs, but it also comes with major economic benefits. In the UK, we've already delivered 50 gigawatts of renewables, and that's set to increase by tens of gigawatts over the coming decades. We're delivering 6 gigawatts of nuclear power, and we're targeting 20 to 30 million tons of carbon capture and storage by the early 2030s. We're also delivering other major investments in electricity interconnection and infrastructure, as well as hydrogen. So this is a large-scale technology and capital deployment. So this chart shows that the UK has halved its emissions whilst maintaining economic growth. So you can see the blue line, which shows from 1990 to today, the UK economy has increased in size by 80%, whilst emissions have reduced by 60%. So we've decoupled economic growth from decarbonisation. So decarbonisation no longer needs to mean that you don't grow economically. So decarbonisation investment to date, from 2010 to today, cumulatively is £198 billion. That's around about 260 billion US dollars. So this drives vast economic impact. It's unlocked tens of billions of private investment capital. Renewable investment in offshore wind, onshore wind and solar is a large proportion of this total, with estimates around about 120 billion for renewables. And the Committee on Climate Change in the UK says that we expect a level of 700 billion of cumulative investment by 2040 and 970 billion by 2050. So the investment challenge and the impact of that investment is huge. Now, decarbonisation has supported more than 900,000 jobs in the UK. This brings economic prosperity. It brings prosperity for individuals, for businesses, and for the economy. So more than 900,000 jobs in net zero, and that's grown 10% year on year from last year. the jobs as well. The individual jobs are well above average pay in the UK. We've seen, and we're seeing, £83 billion of gross value added to the economy with a multiplier effect of 1.89. What that means is every dollar that we invest in net zero results in an economic impact of $1.89. That's quite a high multiplier. And these are not just statistics. So these are people's jobs and livelihoods. We're seeing construction jobs, people who build things like power plants. We're seeing manufacturing jobs, people who make materials and products. Service jobs, people like me. Operational and maintenance roles, people who operate and maintain the wind farms, the electricity grids, the power plants. So this is a substantial effort in economic prosperity that leads to prosperity for individuals, for businesses, and for the economy. But we have learned some lessons. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 lessons that we've learned, and hopefully that can help when you're thinking about how to deliver net zero in Thailand. First of all, certainty attracts capital. So we had legislative certainty, so setting carbon budgets in law early and legislating for net zero in 2019, as well as stable long-term goals and clear policy objectives have provided investor certainty. So we've had clear goals for the overall economy for decarbonisation, and then clear goals for each particular sector and how much we want to decarbonise in each sector, be that energy, transport, and industrial processes. So those clear objectives have been key. We've also deployed stable market mechanisms with predictable support schemes. So we have a carbon pricing scheme, but other than the carbon pricing scheme and the power market design that underpins the power market, we have specific interventions where decarbonisation and economic opportunities are clear for investors. So that's in renewables, it's in nuclear, it's in carbon capture and storage. And we delivered all of this through industry. So this is not a government effort alone, it's a public-private partnership. And we've deployed lots of private capital. So it's not just about government funding, it's not just about government action, it's about a public-private partnership. So the results of this have been that we've seen liquid capital flows and therefore a low cost of capital. We've seen large-scale deployment of assets, and we've seen fast learning rates, particularly in renewables, where we've seen the cost of renewables fall dramatically because of the large-scale deployment and the lessons that we've learned in that sector. So this approach has really attracted capital on the basis of that level of certainty. The second lesson is that to prioritize, this chart shows the progress in decarbonisation against our carbon budgets, and it shows the future pathway under the Committee on Climate Change's projections. So we deliberately started with decarbonising power first, because that unlocks deeper decarbonisation in transport and heat as you electrify the rest of the economy. So we eliminated coal from the system, which was a major source of power and emissions in the 1990s. Offshore wind and solar we scaled rapidly, and costs of those technologies fell dramatically. This allows us now to decarbonise heat and transport where we can electrify, but then we're also going to need deep decarbonisation through carbon capture and storage and through hydrogen. So the lesson we've learned there is to deliver well on net zero, prioritising and sequencing activities is really important. The third lesson is that clean power is a hedge. It's a hedge against price shocks. So reduced reliance on fossil fuels has already reduced consumer prices and will continue to stabilise shocks, particularly where we see high gas prices, high international fossil fuel prices. The impact on consumer bills is reduced because we have lots of clean power sources. We have renewables and nuclear. So it reduces exposure to those fuel imports. So if you see the charts that we've got here on the slide, they show the impact of the gas price crisis in 2022. So the blue bar shows the underlying commodity cost, the gas price, and the pink bar shows the impact on consumer bills. So we had a 300% increase in gas prices, but only an 80% increase in final energy bills to consumers. And that's because we have those clean power sources. And we've done some analysis that shows that if the same sort of shock happened in 2025 or 2035, that impact is even greater. So we reduce the proportional impact of those energy price shocks. So clean energy is a hedge against price shocks. It stabilizes prices. However, clean energy does have cost. So decarbonisation comes with cost to consumers. This investment has to be paid for somewhere, and some forms of clean power are cheaper than conventional sources. But on an overall system, on an island system like the UK, we have experienced substantial increases in the cost of energy to consumers. So the UK now has some of the highest energy costs of industrialised nations, and this has a number of reasons. Primarily the gas price and the spike in gas prices, but it also includes additional costs for investment in things like low carbon infrastructure and policy costs. So the impact is being felt by households and businesses, affecting cost of living for citizens and our competitiveness. And so for me, a clear lesson is to calibrate the speed of decarbonisation to make sure that it is affordable and that there is public acceptance and buy-in. That's a really important lesson that we've learned in our journey in the UK. So then as we look ahead, power alone is not enough to decarbonise, and that's a really key message that I want to leave with you today. So power in the UK is now 14% of our emissions, as you can see on the pie chart. Industry is around about the same, and then buildings and transport now make up a greater proportion of the overall emissions. So renewables and electrification and low carbon power should be maximised, but it's not enough on its own. So some processes either can't be electrified, or it's not cheap to electrify them. So cement, steel, chemicals, energy from waste, some forms of dispatchable power, these are processes that can be decarbonised through other means, either more easily or more cheaply. So this is where CCS, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen come in. And we also need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, either from capturing biogenic CO2 and storing it underground, or from direct air capture. So we need to put the net in net zero by offsetting the residual emissions through deploying negative emissions. So carbon capture and storage, what is it? It enables decarbonisation of industry where low carbon power cannot do that. So we capture CO2 from industrial facilities, and this is using existing technology that has been around for decades. We capture CO2 from power, from cement, from steel, from chemicals, or biogenic sources like waste and bioenergy with CCS, as well as direct air capture. We then transport it via pipeline, ship, or rail. So we're transporting the CO2 from the industrial facility out to either a deep underground store site that is either onshore or offshore. And we see through our analysis that most countries will need at least some CCS if they are to get to net zero. Just a little bit about the UK cluster model and the UK CCS policy framework, which I was involved in delivering when I was in UK government, and it's really close to my heart, and has now resulted in successful financial investment decisions, which we're very pleased about in the UK. So the UK has plentiful CO2 storage resources. The theoretical level of storage, geological storage, in the UK is expected to be around about 78 billion tonnes. So that's 200 years of the UK's emissions. And 50% of our emissions are in what we call industrial clusters. So they are in areas, industrial regions, where you have close proximity to one another. So the industrial processes are close by. That means that a cluster model, where you deploy projects together in a coordinated way with shared infrastructure, means that infrastructure is used much more efficiently and therefore is more affordable. So in the UK, we developed a suite of business models, market interventions, contracts for capture and for transport and storage. So these business models underpin the financeability of the project. So it provides revenue support from government, and it underwrites some of the value chain risks that we see in CCS. We've since delivered 5 financial investment decisions, 2 major transport and storage networks on both the east coast of the UK and the west coast at Teesside and at HyNet, and 3 capture projects. And we expect to deliver 3 to 5 more capture projects in the next year to 18 months. So really, really pleased with that positive progress on the basis of this cluster model. This is based on £21 billion of funding, which is around about $25 billion of government funding. But one real success in the UK is we've deployed £10 billion of private debt from commercial banks. So that means that commercial banks have lent more than £10 billion of private debt, making these business models and projects bankable. And then we've seen major economic benefits, and we will see major economic benefits from the CCS sector. So our analysis shows that we expect around about £4 to £5 billion of gross value added in CCS from the sector, from the supply chain, from the construction and the operation of the projects. And this could lead to as many as 50,000 jobs. So out of that 900 or so thousand jobs, we could see 50,000 jobs in CCS alone in the UK. So some progress there and real future potential. So what are the lessons we've learned in delivering this CCS program? We've learned that policy is fundamental because markets don't effectively value carbon. There isn't a willingness to pay that's sufficient to cover the investment costs of delivering these projects, and therefore policy intervention from government is absolutely critical. So lesson number one is setting clear objectives is key. So we had a clear objective of 20 to 30 million tonnes per annum, and we had sector-based targets for hydrogen, for industrial, for power, and for waste. We'd also say that covering the costs of doing CCS through market-based business models, these contracts, is absolutely critical. It costs more to do CCS than not do CCS, and someone has to pay that bill. And as I say, markets don't currently value that decarbonisation. Therefore, government is providing the revenue support for that through the business models. The third lesson, and I cannot overstate this one, is managing the financial and physical risks across these complex value chains. So if we don't do this well, and if we don't align risk management strategies and underpin that with policy, then we can't get private debt, we can't get capital into these projects. The fourth is ensuring that there's good coordination between the different actors in the chain, be that domestically or cross-border, if you have a cross-border arrangement. So delivering these major projects is incredibly complex, and the question is, how does it all fit together and when? We also need, and what we've done in the UK, is set clear institutional roles. What is the role of government? What is the role of regulator? What's the role of the private sector and the different actors within the private sector, and how do they interact? We set that in legislation, and we set that in clear rules, and that has worked well. The public-private partnership that we've delivered this through has been the biggest element of success. So collaboration between the private sector, between government, regulator, has been absolutely critical to getting the 5 financial investment decisions that we have seen. So then turning this to Thailand's potential. So I've been having a few discussions around the CCS sector in Thailand. And I'd say I believe that Thailand and the ASEAN region has a globally significant opportunity for low carbon prosperity. I'd say there are 4 main drivers for action on CCS specifically. First of all, to decarbonise domestic emissions. So decarbonising Thailand to achieve the NDC. Secondly, and importantly, is export potential. As major consumer economies like the EU and the UK deploy carbon border adjustment mechanisms and consumers increasingly demand low carbon products, it's important for non-EU, so exporting nations to those countries to consider how they can decarbonise. And if you can do that at lower cost versus the carbon prices and the decarbonisation costs in those countries, you can have a competitive advantage and sell products and materials into those countries through the 2030s and 40s as these carbon border adjustment mechanisms come in. The third is exploiting the natural resources. So Thailand clearly has positive geology for carbon capture and storage. You have depleted gas fields. You have onshore and offshore potential in storage. So potentially becoming a sink of emissions where you charge a fee to other emitter nations. So there are emitter nations around Asia that are looking for a home for their CO2 and willing to pay a fee for that, be that Japan, Korea, or Singapore. So there's a real economic opportunity there. And then the fourth is financial offtake. So what I mean by this is delivering projects in Thailand at lower cost than alternatives overseas, and then selling the financial product, the offtake, under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement to help others to decarbonise and bring in economic revenue for those projects. So I'd say, look, you have the geology, you have the capability, and I'd say, therefore, you have the potential to deliver a really strong sector in CCS and in industrial decarbonisation in Thailand. So I'd say Thailand can decarbonize domestic emissions of cement, steel, power and chemicals, but also has the potential to become a service provider in carbon storage as well. The lessons from the UK are informative, but you will need your own blueprint. It's not a copy and paste job, and I don't intend to communicate it as such. So I'd say setting clear goals, stable long-term policy signals are important, bridging the cost gap with specific interventions, and managing those value chain risks are really key. So this event, I'd say, setting the scene to show that you've got the ambition, and I'm really pleased to be part of it. So just to run through the key messages to take away today before I close. So the UK has achieved major decarbonisation while continuing to grow the economy. We're delivering major economic benefits from investment, which have led to jobs and business opportunities. Lessons have been learned. We've learned lessons in policy, providing that certainty, in prioritising and sequencing, and particularly in considering both the costs and the benefits and how you sequence whilst maintaining public acceptance. Industrial decarbonisation through carbon capture and storage is absolutely necessary, and I'd say that Thailand and the ASEAN region has a globally significant opportunity. So thank you for the invitation today, and I'd be pleased to continue discussions over coffee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris Thackeray. Thank you, sir.